The battle's aftermath was a tableau of carnage and desperation. The survivors and I staggered through the ruins of the cathedral, tending to our wounded and fortifying what little remained of our defenses. The Alpha Prime had fled, grievously wounded but still alive, leaving a trail of blood and destruction in its wake. We all knew it was only a matter of time before the beast returned, hungrier and more vicious than ever, with the remnants of its pack at its heels. As I searched the rubble for anything that might aid us in the coming fight, a glint of metal caught my eye. Brushing aside the debris with trembling hands, I discovered a hidden trapdoor, its surface etched with strange, arcane symbols that seemed to writhe and twist in the flickering light of the nearby fires. With a grunt of effort, I managed to pry the portal open, revealing a narrow, winding staircase that descended into the depths beneath the cathedral. The air that wafted up from the darkness was cold and stale, carrying with it a scent of ancient dust and something else. Something that set my hackles on edge and made my heart pound with a nameless dread. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to flee this place and never return. But with the howls of the werewolves drawing nearer, their echoes reverberating through the shattered streets of the city, I knew I had no choice. Steeling myself, I descended into the vault. The stairs seemed to go on forever, spiraling downward into an abyss of shadow and silence. The only sound was the echo of my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart in my ears, a deafening rhythm that seemed to grow louder with every step. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on me from all sides, a tangible force that threatened to smother me, to drag me down into the depths and never let me go. And then, just when I thought the blackness would swallow me whole, I emerged into a chamber that stole the breath from my lungs and sent a spike of pure, unadulterated terror through my veins. The room was vast and circular, its walls lined with towering shelves and gloomy alcoves filled with ancient tomes, strange artifacts, and weapons of every description. The air was thick with the cloying scent of decay, and every surface was covered in a layer of dust that looked as though it hadn't been disturbed in centuries. But it was the object in the center of the chamber that commanded my attention, that made my blood run cold and my skin crawl with a horror beyond words. There, atop a pedestal of obsidian, lay a blade that seemed to pulse with an inner darkness, a darkness that drank in the feeble light of my flickering torch and spat it back out as a sickly, writhing shadow. The sword was long and curved, its hilt wrapped in silver wire that glinted like the eyes of a predator in the gloom, and all along the blade, etched into the blackened metal, were runes that burned with an eerie, otherworldly light, runes that seemed to whisper secrets of blood and madness, of a hunger that could never be sated. As I approached the blade, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end, could feel a chill wind whipping around me like the breath of some unseen horror. My hand trembled as I reached out to grasp the hilt, but the moment my fingers closed around the icy metal, a jolt of pure agony lanced through my body, setting every nerve alight with a searing, blinding pain. In that instant, I saw visions of the blade's dark history, of the countless atrocities it had witnessed, and the rivers of blood it had spilled. I saw the face of the monster who had forged it, a twisted, feral thing that leered at me from the shadows, its eyes filled with a malice that made my soul shrivel and my heart turn to ice. And I saw the ritual that could be used to unleash the blade's true power, to turn its darkness against the very creatures that had birthed it. But the price of that ritual was a steep one, a price paid in suffering and sacrifice, in the blood of innocents and the screams of the damned. As the visions faded, and I found myself once again standing in the chamber, the blade heavy in my hand and my brow slick with a cold sweat, I knew that I had no choice. The werewolves were coming, and this cursed sword was our only hope, our only chance to end the nightmare once and for all. With a trembling hand, I reached for the ancient tome that lay open on a nearby pedestal, its pages brittle and yellow with age. As I pored over the faded text, written in a language I had never seen before, I could feel a growing sense of dread stealing over me, a sense that I was tampering with forces beyond my comprehension, forces that could destroy me utterly if I made even the slightest mistake. But there was no turning back now. The die had been cast, and the fate of the city, of the world itself, hung in the balance. With a deep breath and a silent prayer to whatever gods might be listening, I tucked the tome under my arm and turned to ascend the stairs. The blade of shadow and silver clutched tight in my fist. As I emerged into the ruined cathedral, I could hear the baying of the werewolves growing louder, could feel their hunger and their fury bearing down on us like a tidal wave of claws and fangs. The survivors gathered around me, their faces pale and drawn in the guttering light of the torches, their eyes filled with a desperate, fading hope. "I found a way," I said, my voice sounding hollow and distant to my own ears. "A way to end this, once and for all. But it won't be easy. It will require a sacrifice, a price paid in blood and pain and sorrow." I held up the blade, letting them see the darkness that swirled within its runes, the shadows that danced along its edge. "This is our only chance," I said, "our only hope of survival. But I can't do it alone. I need your help, your strength, your courage." For a moment, there was only silence. A silence broken only by the distant howls of the werewolves and the pounding of my own heart. And then, one by one, the survivors nodded, their eyes hardening with resolve, their hands tightening on their weapons. "We're with you," they said, their voices a ragged chorus of defiance and despair, "until the end." And as the howls of the werewolves echoed through the shattered streets and the blood-red moon rose high overhead, I knew that the end was coming, one way or another. The only question was whether it would be theirs or ours. The ancient tome felt heavy in my hands as I pored over its blood-stained pages, trying to decipher the arcane ritual that promised an end to our nightmare. The survivors worked frantically around me, barricading the entrances to the cathedral, gathering what little silver and holy relics we had left. But it was a pitiful defense against the horror that was coming for us. I could feel it in my bones, a deep, primal dread that grew with every passing moment. The Alpha Prime was still out there, wounded but alive, gathering the remnants of its pack for one final, savage assault. They would come for us like a tide of claws and fangs, driven by an insatiable hunger for flesh and a thirst for vengeance. As I read, the words seemed to blur and twist before my eyes, forming visions of unspeakable horror. I saw the origins of the werewolf curse, born in an age of darkness and blood. I saw the first alpha rising from the shadows, a monstrous thing of pure primal savagery. And I saw the terrible price that had been paid to end its reign of terror, the sacrifices that had been made, the innocent blood that had been spilled. A sudden crash jolted me from my reverie, the sound of splintering wood and shattering stone. They were here. I could hear the screams of the survivors as they fought, the snarls and howls of the werewolves as they tore through the barricades like tissue paper. The stench of blood and death filled the air, mingling with the acrid tang of fear. I gripped the silver blade tighter, feeling the runes etched into its surface burning against my skin. The tome had spoken of its power, of the way it could channel the energy of the ritual and focus it into a weapon of devastating might. But it had also spoken of the toll it would take on the wielder, the way it would ravage mind and body alike. I pushed down my fear, my doubts, forcing myself to focus on the words that had been seared into my memory. The ritual was a complex thing, a delicate weaving of arcane syllables and gestures. One mistake, one slip of the tongue, and it would all be for nothing. As I began to chant, I could feel the power of the blade awakening, could feel the shadows that clung to its edge stirring to life. The air around me grew cold, heavy with a sense of dread that made my skin crawl. The battle raged on around me, the survivors fighting with a desperate fury against the overwhelming tide of werewolves. I could hear their screams, their cries of pain and terror, but I forced myself to block them out, to focus on the ritual. The words fell from my lips like drops of blood, each one a searing agony that left me gasping for breath. I could feel the darkness of the blade seeping into me, could feel it twisting my thoughts and emotions, turning them into something monstrous. But still I pressed on, pouring every ounce of my will into the ritual, into the desperate hope that it would be enough to save us. And then I heard it. A howl that shattered the air like a thunderbolt, a sound of pure, unbridled rage. The Alpha Prime had arrived. I could feel its presence like a weight on my soul, could feel the hatred and hunger that radiated from it like a physical force. It tore through the survivors like a whirlwind, ripping and tearing with a savagery that defied belief. I knew I had only moments before it reached me, before it put an end to our last, desperate hope. I forced myself to speak faster, to pour every ounce of my strength into the final words of the ritual. And then it was there, looming over me like a nightmare made flesh. Its eyes burned with a feral, sickly light, its jaws dripping with the blood of my comrades. With a roar of defiance, I surged forward, the silver blade flashing in my hand. I ducked beneath the Alpha Prime's next swing, feeling the wind of its passage ruffle my hair, and lashed out with the blade, scoring a deep cut along its forearm. The beast howled in pain and rage, its eyes burning with a feral light. It came at me again, its movements a blur of speed and savagery, its jaws snapping shut inches from my face. I could smell the stench of its breath, could feel the heat of its body as it pressed in close. We danced back and forth across the blood-soaked floor of the cathedral, trading blows that shook the very stones beneath our feet. The Alpha Prime was a force of nature, its strength and speed beyond anything I had ever faced. Every blow felt like it would shatter my bones. Every slash of its claws left me bleeding and gasping. But the power of the ritual flowed through me, a searing silver fire that lent strength to my limbs and clarity to my thoughts. I could feel the blade in my hand pulsing with a life of its own, could feel it guiding my movements, showing me where to strike, where to parry. The Alpha Prime's claws raked across my back, tearing through my flesh like paper. I screamed in agony, but I did not falter. I spun around, bringing the blade up in a shining arc, and felt it bite deep into the beast's side, cleaving through muscle and bone. The Alpha Prime staggered, black blood gushing from the wound. But still, it came on, its eyes blazing with an insatiable hunger. It seized me in a crushing grip, its claws puncturing my armor, digging into my flesh. I could feel my ribs cracking under the pressure, could taste blood in my mouth. With a last, desperate surge of strength, I brought my knee up into the beast's groin, feeling something crunch beneath the impact. The Alpha Prime howled in pain, its grip loosening for a split second. It was all the opening I needed. I tore myself free, the blade slicing through the air, a streak of silver death. It struck the Alpha Prime in the throat, piercing its thick hide, severing muscle and sinew. The beast's howl turned to a gurgling choke, black blood spraying from the wound. But even then, it would not die. It lashed out with one massive paw, catching me across the chest, hurling me backwards like a rag doll. I hit the ground hard, the breath driven from my lungs, the blade skittering from my grasp. The Alpha Prime loomed over me, its eyes burning with a hatred that seemed to strip the very flesh from my bones. It reached down, its claws wrapping around my throat, squeezing with a strength that made my vision blur and my head swim. But my fingers had closed around the hilt of the blade once more. With a final, gasping cry, I brought it up, driving it deep into the Alpha Prime's chest, piercing its black, tainted heart. The beast convulsed, a scream of rage and agony tearing from its throat as the silver light consumed it from within. Its grip on my throat spasmed and then went slack, its massive body toppling to the side as the life drained from it. I lay there, gasping and bleeding, the taste of blood and bile thick in my mouth. Every inch of my body screamed with pain. Every breath was a struggle. But I was alive. Against all odds, against all hope, I had survived. Around me, the survivors stirred, their wounds healed, their minds clear for the first time in an eternity. They stared at the broken, lifeless husk of the Alpha Prime, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and horror. I struggled to my feet, leaning on the blade for support. My vision swam, my legs threatening to buckle beneath me. But I forced myself to stand tall. to meet the eyes of the survivors, to give them the strength and hope they so desperately needed. "It's over," I said, my voice a ragged whisper. "The curse is broken. The nightmare has ended." And as the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, as the survivors gathered close with tears of joy and relief, I allowed myself to believe it. We had won. Against all odds, against all hope, we had emerged victorious. And though the scars would linger, though the nightmares would never truly fade, we were alive. The sun rose slowly over the shattered city, its pale light filtering through the haze of smoke and dust that hung in the air. I stood atop the ruined cathedral, the silver blade still clutched in my hand, and surveyed the devastation that stretched out before me. The city was a ruin, its once proud buildings reduced to rubble, its streets choked with the bodies of the fallen. The survivors moved through the wreckage like ghosts, their faces haunted, their eyes hollow with the horrors they had witnessed. But there was something else in those eyes now, something that had been absent for so long. Hope. The knowledge that, despite everything they had endured, despite all they had lost, they had survived. They had faced the darkness and emerged unbroken. I looked down at the blade in my hand, at the runes that still glowed with a faint, pulsing light. The weapon had been our salvation, the key to ending the nightmare that had consumed us, but it had also been a curse, a burden that had nearly destroyed me. I could still feel the power that lurked within the blade, the whispers of madness and bloodlust that echoed in my mind. I knew that I could never truly be free of it, that the scars it had left upon my soul would never fully heal. But I also knew that I had a choice. I could let the darkness consume me, let it twist me into something monstrous and unrecognizable. Or I could fight it, could use the power of the blade for good, to protect the innocent and defend the weak. I turned to face the survivors, my voice raw with emotion as I spoke. "We have won a great victory today. We have broken the curse that held us in its grasp, have vanquished the monsters that sought to destroy us. But our fight is not over." I gestured to the ruined city, to the broken bodies that littered the streets. "We must rebuild. We must heal. We must find a way to live in a world that has been forever changed by the horrors we have faced. It will not be easy. There will be struggles and setbacks, moments when the darkness will threaten to overwhelm us once again." I raised the blade above my head, the silver light catching the sun's rays and scattering them across the gathered survivors. "But we will face those struggles together. We will lean on each other for strength, for courage, for hope. We will remember those we have lost and honor their sacrifice, and we will never, ever give up." The survivors nodded, their eyes shining with a new determination. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that there would be scars that would never fully heal. But they also knew that they were not alone. I sheathed the blade and stepped forward, clasping hands and exchanging embraces with the men and women who had fought beside me, who had bled and suffered and sacrificed. These were my brothers and sisters now, bound by a shared trauma and a shared triumph. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, we set to work, clearing the rubble and tending to the wounded. There was much to be done, much to rebuild. But for now, we savored the simple joy of being alive, of feeling the warmth of the sun on our faces and the solid ground beneath our feet. In the distance, beyond the ruined walls of the city, the world stretched out before us, vast and full of unknown dangers. But we would face those dangers together, armed with the knowledge that we had stared into the abyss and emerged unbroken. The nightmare was over. The curse was broken. And though the scars would linger, though the memories would never fade, we would find a way to heal, to rebuild, to create a future worth living for. As I stood there, surrounded by the survivors, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a feeling of purpose and clarity that I had never known before. I knew that my journey was far from over, that there would be struggles and challenges ahead. But I also knew that I was ready to face them, ready to fight for a world free from the shadow of the werewolf curse, ready to protect the innocent and defend the weak. And as I looked out over the ruins of the city, at the brave men and women who stood beside me, I knew that there was still hope. Still a chance for a brighter tomorrow. The sun rose higher into the sky, banishing the last of the shadows. And together, we stepped forward into the light.